The 1837 Baseford Murders Part 2. As I was saying, the local surgeon was sent for, and he made a more thorough examination of the children, confirming that all four of them had been strangled. Whilst this was all taking place, Thomas Greensmith was 5 miles away in the Robin Hood pub at Lamley. After leaving Baseford around dawn, he'd first walked into Nottingham, then on to Carlton, and finally on to Lamley, because he knew John Brownlow, landlord of the pub and a long-time friend. He was still in the bar 9 o'clock that same night when Brownlow's sister walked in and started telling everybody all about the murder of children in Baseford. As she regaled all around with the gory story that she'd been told, and gave out a description of the man that police believed to have committed the killings, Brownlow recognised in her narrative the face of his friend. Quietly, the bar owner, without alerting anyone else in the bar, sent someone out to fetch the local policeman. It took about an hour for him to arrive, by which time talk around the bar had drifted onto other subjects, and Greensmith had gone to a corner of the room to sit alone beside the fire. The policeman made no immediate arrest, choosing instead to order a jug of beer and join him at his table, where the two men talked for some time. It was during this conversation that Coleshaw, the police officer, realised John Brownlow's suspicions had been well founded. And once Greensmith had confirmed his address in Baseford, that was it. Thomas Greensmith's next public appearance was 2 days later, on the morning of the 5th of April, when the coroner held an inquest inside the Fox and Crown Inn at Baseford, and he was brought from Nottingham Prison to attend. Crowds outside the inn had been growing all morning, and by the time of his arrival they'd spilled out onto the street, all desperate to catch a glimpse of this multiple murderer. Apparently Greensmith himself remained calm throughout, unbothered by the jostling crowd which met his hackney carriage. After being hustled inside, he maintained this unfeeling exterior, listening to the charges calmly and showing little sign of remorse as he waited for the jury to file past the 4 bodies that lay in an adjacent room. When asked to give the court the names and ages of the children, he apparently did so with great composure. Most of the morning was taken up by testimony from the women who had found or seen the bodies on the morning of the killings, and as the afternoon came, it was left to Thomas Greensmith to either deny his guilt or offer up some form of mitigating circumstance for the murders. He spoke clearly, explaining his usual routine to the court and his meeting with Joseph Woodward about the rent arrears in the backyard of his cottage that upset him. Here are his words. I told him I'd agreed with his son to pay it next Wednesday, but he told me he would have it next morning. I told him that was impossible, but I would pay him in a week. He said he would not be put off, and that he would have it in the morning or he would take my goods. I thought if he took my goods I should have nowhere to go, nor no home, nor nothing, and that before my children should be turned into the street in that way, I'd suffer what the law should please to clap on me. The coroner cautioned Greensmith as to the evidence he decided to give the court, concerned that he was about to condemn himself. He was right. Thomas Greensmith had no intentions of trying to mitigate his own actions. He saw his actions as necessary. In fact, as something that a caring father would do for his children. He went on to say that I was not willing to part with my children and I strangled them with my handkerchief. There was almost no consultation amongst the jurors, and their verdict of wilful murder came quickly. In fact, it only took a few minutes to deliver, naming Thomas Greensmith as the murderer of the children. The journey back to Nottingham was apparently a difficult one. The crowds had continued to gather outside the Fox and Crown Inn, and they'd become louder in their condemnation of the man. They surrounded the hackney as it left Baseford and followed it all the way to Nottingham Prison, hurling abuse during this short journey. At 9 o'clock on the 28th of July, Thomas Greensmith, after spending 3 months in prison, was brought before the court and before the Honourable Sir James Allen, and was formally charged with murdering his 4 children. His 9-year-old John, his 7-year-old William, his 5-year-old Anne, and his 2-year-old Mark. The prosecution led by instructing the jury that they could only accept insanity as a cause of the murder if they could form the opinion that the unhappy man was not at the time in a situation whereby he could distinguish right from wrong. Thomas Greensmith had no legal representation and was therefore dependent upon the judge to ensure this possibility was explored. It was to be a difficult day. Greensmith took the stand after listening to the morning's evidence from those who'd attended the inquest, and he set his case out again as he had 12 weeks earlier. There was only one key difference, and that was that having had time to reflect upon his earlier statement, he added that the stimulus for the murder had come from his discussion with Joseph Woodward. The threat that Mr. Woodward gave me caused me to do what I did. It was a clear attempt to say to the court that he was not in control of his actions when he murdered his children. The judge had Henry Attenborough brought to the stand. As surgeon to the county gaol, he was considered medically competent to decide upon Greensmith's state of mind throughout his brief incarceration. He was expected only to give you, if you like, an overview of the prisoner's behaviour, and whether any of this had been as a result of external influence. Whether an event could have triggered his actions. Attenborough had no doubt as to Thomas Greensmith's mental state, and no hesitation in stating that according to the evidence, in his opinion, it had been clear from the first day the 2 men met that something was seriously amiss. Here is what Henry Attenborough said. The pupils of his eyes were much dilated, and there was great anxiety and wildness about their expression, and that irritation has continued since. The tongue too was far from healthy, but in that peculiar state which indicates insanity. Judging from all the circumstances of the case, I am decidedly of the opinion that the man was insane at the time of the perpetration of the act. This was not something that the judge agreed with, though, and there followed some legal debate, where the judge was handed a legal reference which, after considering in detail, caused him to modify his objections. Henry Attenborough was then allowed to expand upon the sentiment he'd expressed. At its conclusion, the judge still refused to recognise the opinion he'd been given, and told the court in no uncertain terms his mode of forming opinions would tend to acquit all the prisoners. No conviction could be obtained if such opinions were to be relied on. There were no dissenting voices, as if to reinforce the judge's view that insanity was not an argument to be viewed with any sense of validity. Samuel Wilkinson, a police constable, was called to give evidence. He testified that shortly after Greensmith's arrest, a pair of children's boots had been found and proven to have belonged to his son, John. Greensmith, having been shown these boots, confirmed he'd taken them from his son immediately after the murders and sold them the same morning, therefore strengthening the court's view that if the prisoner before the bar had been uncertain of his acts before killing his children, he'd certainly been aware of them afterwards, a point not lost on a jury who took only 12 minutes to return a guilty verdict. As the sentence of death was passed, Thomas Greensmith remained as calm as he'd been since his arrest, completely devoid of any passion.